Podcast 3.1 with Clayton again. Welcome back, Clayton.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Of course. Last time we wanted to talk about American exceptionalism, and I don't think you quite got your 2 cents in. And so let's jump into that question. What makes America exceptional?
This is like something that the Supreme Court justices say a lot, but
Mm,
they talk about like rights and Constitution, and that's not actually what makes our country exceptional in that sense. Because like North Korea has a really interesting Bill of Rights. They guarantee the right to relaxation,
mm,
but that doesn't really mean anything, right? I mean, I don't think the
right,
people in North Korea are particularly relaxed. So it's got to do with like the checks and balances system that we have, right? And
mm,
the way that one person or one entity cannot have all the concentration of power. And if it's split and divided, it checks. They check each other through, the three branches of government.
right.
So yeah, I think that's America pretty special.
That's the source of American exceptionalism, you would say.
Yeah, I would say I don't know if it's a source. I don't know if I know enough to say it's a source, but I would say yeah, it's definitely like one of the
It
big
helps
big
maintain it,
parts.
maintain
Yeah.
American exceptionalism. Have you heard of Turner's thesis?
No, I haven't. Uh,
No? So it's a huge historical development in how America is exceptional. Because if you think about to the start of our country, we attributed kind of like Christianity or like, the pilgrims coming over, the Puritans coming over, right? Seeking freedom, religious freedom, as that was what made us exceptional. We were kind of like we were kind of starting a new world compared to that of the old world in Europe. And so Turner was a historian, and he wrote this in the 1890s, I believe. And he was talking about how American exceptionalism is not something religious, and it's not something just because it's, I guess, white people or Europeans that caused exceptionalism. It was that the American West was this democratizing force that allowed the U.S. not to have the social issues like revolutions, social unrest that plagued Europe in the 1800s. Because if you were poor, you could always head out west, right? And that the West functioned as a safety valve in a way to allow people to not have the idea to throw a revolution. They could just it really was a safety valve in a way, right? Your life wasn't just stuck at a certain point in the social ladder and there's no way out. But what do you think about that? Turner's thesis.
yeah, I think that's pretty interesting because yeah, I guess like since there's more land, there's more opportunity or more like if people feel like if they're not getting their fair share in society, they'll just
Mm.
expand west. I feel like that's like a really good default option for like people back then. Obviously now I feel like it's all but like see like now it's like the West is like now America is like America, right? Like it's
Right.
the land all used up. So what do you think about that then? I guess like do you think it will lead to some sort of like or like do you feel like people right now are kind of getting that like angst or social unrest or like
Mm. One of
what do
Turner's
historians?
points was that like because the West was closed, right? There's no more frontier anymore because all the we mapped it out basically, right? There's no more frontier, and so one of the democratizing forces in society is gone. And so you do see the rise of the Socialist Party in the US around this time. And I guess to today, I guess there's no more continental like US too, or there's no like land that's not owned by any nation that we can expand into. But like even during like this time of expansion, there were people on the land, the Native Americans, right? And so I guess Turner's thesis or manifest destiny, or the idea that the US is destined to expand out west, it kind of like played down the role or kind of thought the Native Americans as kind of like non-existent in a way. Like this land is barren, right? There's no one there, but there were people there. And I think there were arguments then that Native Americans used land less effectively than white people, right? If white people grew crops, they could keep maybe 10 more people on the land than like Native Americans who had to hunt or gather. So that was an argument. Whether some people think that's that should be an argument for like effectiveness, because like I guess you and I were both like living in a capitalist society, right? So we do think in terms of effectiveness, but is it worth that a culture gets wiped out or moved off their land if they don't use it, I guess, as effectively
Yeah.
in
So
certain people's
I
eyes?
think that for that point, I
Mm,
feel like it doesn't even matter what we think is like good or bad. Because I think there's definitely going to be people who are more on the economic side, right? Like you said, they're going to be like, oh, white people use land more effectively, therefore they should have it. And they're going to be people who like, are on the opposite end. They're like, well, these people were here first. This is their culture, like you said, right?
mm,
This is their culture. This is their land. You can't just
right,
come here and wipe out a culture. But I think
right.
that doesn't matter. Reality is like the way I feel like nature by itself is just survival of the fittest. Like nature by
Mm.
itself, if you want to call it capitalist, sure. Like, it's like Charles Darwin, right? Like things are just gonna happen. Things are going to happen because things are better. Like for example, like I have a dog, right,
Mm,
in my house, and whenever he goes in the back, he one time he was like killing like a baby fox. He saw
mm.
a baby fox and he like grabbed it in his mouth and started shaking it.
Wow.
I don't know if he thought toy or whatever, but you know
Mm,
what I mean. That's like the way nature works. He's not like he's not like I don't know. I don't think he was gonna eat it, but like he was like playing with it, whatever. It doesn't matter because
the
he's
dog
more
nature
powerful.
came out.
Right, the nature came out. Right, exactly. So I think that's just the way nature and society progress.
Mm,
That's just the way things happen. I mean, like, I'm taking this ancient Egyptian class right now, and the way like we see hierarchies, like social hierarchies.
right.
That there's a few people at the top that rule and govern. They have all the power. It's like it might be bad, yeah, and it might be good in one perspective, but it's just kind of the way things naturally fall. And like
Mm.
I don't know, maybe it's sort of like a Pareto principle, kind of like just things just tend to have this natural way of like happening. But I don't know.
So
I think it's interesting.
there's two
But
things
yeah,
I can say from that. There's one way that doesn't turn out so well, and the other way it's okay. So the first way is that people have made this argument, right? Survival of the fittest in society, and that's what led to like social Darwinism and like eugenics. That's like the kind of dark path to head down towards, because by saying that, like you think of the people who are saying that, they kind of think of themselves in a way like God, in a way. They're at the top of society. They have a responsibility to make sure that the poor don't keep there doesn't keep growing like a growing population of poor people, right? And so they think that since the poor are unfit, right, they're not the fittest, so therefore we should castrate them or make them unable to reproduce so they can't reproduce for more poor people, right? So that gets into that dark history of the US. But the
yeah.
other side of it, this idea that, I guess this is more, have you read the book Guns, Germs, and Steel, or have you heard of it?
No,
So it's about like
no.
I think there's this guy, I think the author's name was Diamond, but he was talking to an Australian native or someone, and then he's like, the Australian native is like, why is it that like white people like are all over the world, why is their culture dominant over the other cultures in a way? And he thought that was a really interesting question. And so he wrote a book exploring this type of stuff. Why is it that the Native Americans weren't able to resist the initial colonists? And so Guns, Germs, and Steel, Guns talks about like, weaponry. The West had more advanced technology. So you could talk about that being like, if you have more advanced weaponry, well, someone's going to use it, right? And dominate the other culture. Guns, and then there's germs, right? Native Americans weren't able to resist diseases. Europeans had a lot of diseases because they lived in cities, like they had cholera, tuberculosis, all that. Native Americans got wiped out because of that, the diseases. And then steel is more about, I guess, trade, and also the idea of, I guess that goes into economics a bit. And then also animals, like I think 13 of 14 major earth mammals were located outside of the Americas, only the llamas in the Americas. And so because of those factors, it makes it seem like, I guess it's natural for Europeans or Americans to dominate. But again, I guess it comes down to what is, instead of saying it's natural, it's like what factors led to certain type of domination or a power imbalance. You know what I mean? Yeah. But
I guess you can like dig into the roots. You could be like, where did that weaponry come from, or where did that? Yeah.
right.
But I think sort of like cities and stuff, right? Like, I guess now that I think about it, right, like all these European settlers, they came from like cities and villages, and when you're with a ton of people, you're just gonna like, I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like you're just gonna bounce ideas off of one another. You're gonna work with a lot of people. You have more resources. Yeah, I just feel like that's, yeah, I feel like that's just kind of the way like things. I feel like, you know, once you start something, it's like a snowball effect to me. Like, you know, you get a leg up, you're kind of always like going to be on top, and that's kind of like why the world has become so westernized. I think like the Western world, they just had that like initial jump. Like, I don't
Initial
know
jump.
how, I don't know like how that manifested, but they got that initial jump, and then they, you know, they ran with it. But it's pretty
It's
interesting, like even speaking on weapons, right? Like, I think Chinese people had like gunpowder or whatever, right? And I
they
think like it
invented
wasn't
gunpowder,
until like,
right? Yeah.
yeah, and then used it for like fireworks, and then like I
Yes.
think it was like Europeans, they went over to China, and then they like took that gunpowder, they made it a weapon or
That's
something
right.
like that, but
That's right.
they never fought to. So anyway, it's actually pretty interesting. I haven't looked that deep into that,
Yeah,
but to
guns
that
germs and
issue.
steel. The other thing is development of agriculture in the West. Because with development of agriculture, you can specialize. No matter everyone needs to grow food. And so you have business classes, you have I guess scientific community, right? You can have those things because not everyone has to grow food. And so Native Americans, they're still sustenance. And so they couldn't develop these more advanced technologies. So I guess that's where the steel parts comes in, right? Well, how do you develop steel? You have to, it's not just found naturally in nature. Yeah. Is there anything more you want to say on Manifest Destiny, Turner's thesis, American exceptionalism?
I find it pretty interesting. I think I never thought of it as like the West being sort of like a safety valve for the American people. But now that I think about it, I think it's like it's honestly kind of true. It's kind of true that like you know, you need that way. You need a way for people to just like find new possibilities, new frontiers, and
Right.
yeah, that that's
Otherwise, they
pretty
just turn a revolution.
right, exactly, yeah.
Mm. I guess another thing you wanted to talk about, we're gonna pivot a bit, is Federal Reserve and that their role in the economy. I think
Yeah,
this is where we're gonna have a lot of disagreements. When you said last time we were in echo chamber, it might sound like that. This is where I think we're gonna clash a bit. So, what's your position on the Federal Reserve? Why don't we start there?
I guess I never really. I guess for me, I was always fascinated by. I'm always fascinated by the way things work behind the scenes. I feel like a lot of times in life we don't realize like the different entities or the different companies and things that are moving behind the scenes to make society work, right? And I feel like the
Right.
Federal Reserve is those things that people don't really like know about, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
there and it's huge. So I guess like because I'm a business school student, right? I feel like I'm just like more inclined to just kind of observe these things, right? Know what the Fed
Right.
is doing, knowing they're doing what they do, and you kind of never think about like, oh, is it good or bad? But I guess like for me, and that's kind of where you and I disagree because you're like, oh, why do we even have it in the first place? And whereas me, it's just kind of like I can't see a world without it. So I guess like the way I see
Mm.
the Federal Reserve, right,
Right.
is like, and I think that people at the Fed see themselves this way too. But it's kind of like when the economy is too hot, the Fed is there to cool it down, and when the economy is not doing so good, it's cold, then the Fed needs to heat it up. That's the kind of the way I see it. So it's not like oh, you know, the Fed is always like, you know, trying to heat up the economy or always trying to slow down. It's just like it depends on the situation and depends on the timing where we are in the economic cycle. And I guess your argument, right, would be like, well,
Go for it.
something like the economy itself will self-correct, right? Like that's what
That's
we're
it.
always
Yes.
taught in our text, right? Like, you
Big
know,
fan.
supply back or demand will always shift, you know, forward or whatever, you know, inflationary
Laissez-faire.
gap.
The invisible hand will
Yeah,
regulate things. Yes.
right. And I guess the Fed is kind of there to like kind of skip over those like those like pain, right? That pain during that transition time. So I guess yeah, that's where you and I agree. But you go ahead and elaborate what you think.
I guess when I look at the Federal Reserve, right, we look at what the goal of the Federal Reserve is. I think you said the main goals were maximizing employment, stabilizing prices, and moderating
Yeah.
long-term interest rates, right? So on paper, I think these sound good, but I like to look at, because I'm a historian, I like to look at things from historical perspectives. So why was the Federal Reserve created in the first place? It was created because capitalism naturally has a lot of boom and bust cycles, right? And then I think in the Gilded Age, so the period from 1890 to even after the Civil War, 1870s to 1910s, there's a lot of boom and panics, right? When people go on bank runs, try to grab their money because the economy is not doing so well. And so there's this constant, it's unstable. The economy is unstable, right? But my argument is that I think that's the natural state of things. Because if you try to
Well,
regulate,
that's
if you
good. That's kind of what I'm for.
so I think that's where our disagreement. You think that we can avoid it, or instead of like a seesaw up and down constantly, the Fed can just keep it in the middle, right? Just
Right.
stability over volatility, right? But I think that then that's no longer capitalism, right? It's not laissez-faire anymore. It's more like the visible hand. The Fed is the visible hand regulating things.
I don't trust the invisible hand.
You don't trust the invisible hand, right? But because why would you? I think that's the thing with a lot of people. What is the invisible hand? People don't like something invisible these days. They want stats. They want concrete, someone's doing something to regulate. You know what I mean? But if the Fed was created in
Yeah.
1913, right? If their goal is to maximize employment, stabilize prices, then why did the Great Depression and like the 2008 recession occur? Why is it COVID we feel that the relief funds went to big businesses and it didn't help out the small person? You know what I mean? So those are my big three historical examples. If the Fed was created in 1913, why was it unable to prevent the Great Depression, the recession, and also it seems like it's bailed out big business but not the small businesses? Oh, I guess what
I
do you
guess
think about that?
so for the first point, I agree. I guess it's kind of like on like how the Fed couldn't prevent your first point on how the Fed couldn't prevent like things like the Great Depression or whatnot.
Mm.
And I think that just kind of goes to show that maybe there's sort of like something natural happening behind the scenes that you just can't prevent it. It's just going to happen. I guess my second point on the thing on like helping big businesses. So like when the Fed, right, you can do two things, right? Like as the Fed, you have two tools. That's it, but they're very powerful tools, right? You can lower and increase the federal funds rate, right? So
Right.
essentially just like lowering and hiking up interest rates, and then you can buy into the bond market, or you can pull that money out. And the Fed, they bought into, I think it was like something $1 trillion when it was like an unprecedented amount of money that they poured in the bond market. And what happens when that drives yields and just overall, like it just makes cost of borrowing cheap, right? And when cost of borrowing is cheap, who's gonna try to fight for that money? All these big businesses, they're just gonna go in and they're gonna get, obviously there's gonna be debt that they're gonna have to pay, right? It's not like free money, but compared to what they normally get, it's really like these are super low interest rates, right? So you're gonna spend this money to invest in your company, expand your factories, whatever, and then do stock buybacks and drive your stock price up and pay out your executives. And I think like it's just because small companies just don't have access to those capital markets that big companies do. So I guess like to that point, right, the Fed, yeah, they definitely help big businesses in the market. We were talking about the other day, like how the stock market just all of a sudden like went up so much because, even though the economy itself wasn't, the economy is doing like, like it's doing great because it's growing back, but there's a lot of problems right now, right? And the stock market isn't like capturing that because it just keeps going up. Now, obviously, it's like a lot of volatility and it's going back down. But I think that's kind of what the Fed did, right? The Fed caused that in a sense, and I think they might not be the only cause. I don't know, but I think they're a big cause. And I think just once again, that's kind of the nature of things. If you're going to make it easy to borrow money and whatnot, big companies who have access to these capital markets, they're going to take advantage of that. And what they're going to do is that's why last year was a huge year for mergers and acquisitions of companies, right? Just buy out the competition, man. Like just buy out other companies, merge with other companies, acquire other companies. And and you use that capital to just
So it's
become even more
interesting.
dominant, become
You're
bigger.
mentioning
So I don't
mentioning
know
my
if the
point
Fed
right
is
now.
like, hmm?
You're mentioning my point right now because you said
Yeah.
that it's
So
natural for
I think
companies to
like
invest. But yeah, go.
yeah. So but the thing with that though is like I don't think that's like intentional. You know what I mean? I don't think the Fed is like, oh yeah, let's like kill
Help the
like
big
all these
business.
small
Of
businesses.
course.
Yeah. And
Right.
I think it's just the way. Fortunately, that's just or unfortunately or fortunately, what it depends on what side you are, right? This is just the way things are, and that's just kind of like how the big dog is always gonna rule over the little dogs, I guess.
If the Fed regulates, if the Fed doesn't regulate, the small dog might have a chance then. You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah, yeah.
So
That's what our
that's my
economics.
point. That's my point. It's that in the recession, if the big companies aren't doing well or they've been doing bad business, they won't be bailed out by government. If you bail them out, they'll never die. They'll just be these big monopolies that are impossible to compete with
Mm,
from small businesses, right? Versus small businesses, they're the ones that have a chance during the recession. It's kind of like the cycle of life and death. The flower dies, wilts, it seeds. You might think though dying is bad, but then it gives life to the next generation. You know what I mean? I think it's
right.
the same thing with capitalism. We try to avoid the death part, but then we like keep this old man company like alive on like life support, and then it's just there. But I guess Americans today we tend to not like big corporations, but then we also want a stable economy, right? So this is kind of where I get it. This is kind of where like I'm the conflict I have with the Fed, because it's like, sure, you keep the economy well, but what's the side effect? You know what I mean? Or what's at what cost? The other example I want to use is like maximizing employment, right? That sounds good, but something that happened in 2008 is because they tried to maximize employment, right? Get like they want high employment statistics. So what happened was a lot of full-time positions, they got turned into part-time positions that could be done by multiple people, right? So you could say that then you created jobs, but in a way those jobs are not full-time jobs that like can sustain like a person. You know what I mean? So that's one of the places where like statistics or like making the economy meet certain metrics can become an issue. It's kind of like taking the SAT in a way. It's like the SAT was meant to just measure your intelligence. Okay, if that was the goal, then fine. But the problem is people now try to make themselves get better statistics, or like to meet the
I
metric.
see.
That I think that's when it becomes an issue.
So I guess that goes to our differences on bailing out, not bailing out, right? So I guess yeah, I can agree with you, right? That we shouldn't, we shouldn't, be trying. I guess like in the avoiding, we're trying to keep everything stable, and essentially we're trying to get all the positive without any of the negative, right? That's essentially like what the Federal Reserve is kind of there for, right? I guess if
Sure.
you want to put it that way. But then I feel like, okay, for example, in 2008, if the government didn't step in, I think it would have been, I don't know, just like the amount of losses.
Catastrophic.
Yeah, it would
Job
be
loss and all
catastrophic.
that. Yeah.
That's my, but and then your view is like, oh well, they'll never learn, and I'm like, fine, fine. Like for me, I'm okay with that. I guess like I'm okay with that. It's just like at the expense of sparing people's like, obviously the government couldn't prevent everything, right? But we have Lehman Brothers and they failed and whatnot, right? Like there were many companies that and just 2008 was not good, right? But
Mhm.
without the government's help, it would have been a lot worse. And I think for me, I just can't. Maybe I'm too optimistic or whatever. But yeah, I just can't bear to see that. I need some sort of like safety net, because like I said before,
Safety net.
the invisible hand, man. I don't know. Maybe I'm not like as capitalist as you are, but yeah.
So
What's your take
that's
on that then?
when you say you're not as capitalist as I am, that's the kind of like dilemma I run into. It's because people now point to the flaws of capitalism, like the 2008 recession. You only bailed out the big companies, right? That's the problem with capitalism. It's always the big will dominate the small. But then I'm like, no, no, no. If you're those people who are arguing, they're probably the ones advocating for a mixed market, right?
Yeah.
Or a regulating of capitalism. But then to me, what got us into the problem is the mixed market, is that we're not pure capitalists. So you can't say it's capitalism's fault because it wasn't a capitalist system in 2008. I think the Lehman Brothers got into trouble, and then all these big banks were lending money at a very risky in a very risky way because of government regulations. I think Alan Greenspan or whoever was the Federal Reserve Chair at that point, he before 2008, he was playing around with interest rates, I think, that led to banks doing more risky behavior. So, but like he probably did that not to cause the banks to be more risky, but he wanted to good business or the U.S. business to grow, right? But it's always like that's where I come back to the invisible hand. How do you know that what you do is beneficial in the long run? I don't. I don't know. I don't. I hope the Fed doesn't. Maybe the Fed knows, thinks they know, but then how? Like it still caused a recession in the end. Do you know what I mean?
Do you think capitalism should be totally unregulated, or like should there be some regulation then?
Hmm. I'm tempted to say completely unregulated, but that of course that's kind of like radical, and I don't like because we were born into a society with regulated capitalism, right?
True.
And so I'm always like hesitant to just say like follow an ideology. You know what I mean? I think when we were younger, it was working well relatively, but then I think back to historical examples, right? The Gilded Age. People tend to think of that as like it's gold on the outside, but inside is rotten or not doing so well,
Yeah.
right? You have a lot of these wealthy capitalists like Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, and they have these big monopolies, and all the while the workers are suffering, right? But you have to think about the other side of the story with the Gilded Age. We've never had so much industrial growth as a nation ever since like 1900s and the Gilded Age.
Really.
Because
Mm.
because since then we have like if you think about like even for us local example in New York, New Jersey, can we build more tunnels or bridges anymore? It's impossible because of
No.
so much regulation. You have to talk about getting zoning requirements. You have to get environmental regulations now. You have to get, anyways, it's so like bureaucratic, so much bureaucratic red tape. It's impossible to do anything anymore, right? And so people complain about NJ Transit. Well, who owns NJ Transit? It's the government owns the controlling stock. If the government doesn't own it, it'd probably go out of business because it's, people want better transportation. And so I think it's because of capitalism that we were able to grow so fast during the Gilded Age. Now, of course, we grew a lot after World War II with the information age, you could say, and then with Steve Jobs in the 1980s, the booming of the internet, you could say that's growth too. But physical infrastructure, we talk about how we lack that so much. I think that has a lot to do with us propping up
Yeah.
big monopolies like railroads or bailing out big business.
Yeah.
What do you think about
Actually,
that?
I do kind of agree with you there on the bureaucracy part. I think I wouldn't want to go totally unregulated, but I would want some regulation. I want the SEC. I would want like some form of the Federal Reserve. I guess I haven't formed my opinions well there, but I will say to that point on bureaucracy, I don't know if you heard of like when during the Trump administration, they were like prosecuting or like looking into or American Chinese professors who were doing research abroad in China. And people are like, oh, well, why are these American Chinese professors doing research, in China? Like, shouldn't they be doing it for the US? And the reason why is because research needs to be funded, right? And there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of, things and forms to sign and a lot of approval time. Whereas with China, it's one centralized government. They can do whatever they want. So what the Chinese government was like, hey, I'll give you money and you come over here, teach a class or whatever, but we'll give you all the resources and scientists and like technology. We'll give you this lab space to do your research or whatever. And then the professor's like, okay, well, I'd rather do that than like, wait like 10 years to get or however long, whatever. Right?
Isn't
I'd
that a
rather do
cruel
that.
irony? Isn't that a cruel irony that in this sense, China has a more capitalist system than us,
They
even though they're
are,
communist, right?
before, I always told this to my mom. It's so funny because like every year I go back to China, at least before COVID, you go to Shanghai and I'm like, dude, that's like another building there. Like they just like built a skyscraper in like a year, like, 50 skyscrapers. I'm like, what? Like in the US, I mean, in New York City, you can't even get a subway line, dude.
Exactly.
You can't even
Exactly.
do a subway line. Yeah.
Right.
So, and that's China is probably more capitalist than us for sure. Yeah.
Right.
And I guess there's good there's good and bad, but I think in that sense there is more good to have like
Well,
unregulated like
they just
growth.
need one triangle shirtwaist fire in China because they do things fast, right? They can do things fast, right?
Sure.
When you do things fast, there's going to be errors here and there, right? So with the capitalist system, one of the things that led to more regulation was the triangle shirtwaist factory. Have you heard of that? It was like girls locked in a building and they had to like keep, I think it was producing like underwear, right? They had to make it, and then a fire started, and since they were locked in, they all
Yeah,
burned to
yeah.
death, right, in New York. And that's what led to regulation of capitalism, right? So we don't want
Mm.
girls to die in a locked building just because they're working like 10-hour days, right? But okay, I think China's heading, maybe if we have a moment in China there, that might happen to China too, where this unregulated capitalism becomes regulated because of singular events like that. And it's not to say like that event wasn't tragic, but was it worth it in terms of long-term growth, or growth across the nation? That's something I think we have to reckon as Americans. Now we have no, basically no infrastructure growth. Is that a good thing for
Sure.
us in terms of safety?
Right.
I guess safety is good, everyone's safe, but you're not growing, quote quote, in that sense. I wanted to end
Yeah,
on
but
this
then
note on bailouts, but go.
oh yeah, no. Well, okay. Well, I guess like in like business, right? There's always the inverse relationship between return and risk, right? The
Right.
more risk you incur, or I guess the higher return you want, the more risk you will incur. And if you want like a safe return, well then, your risk is going to be super low, right? So it's kind of like,
But you
I
also
don't
get
know.
less reward, risk and reward,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right. Yeah, so you get less reward, but then it's just kind of like, yeah. So I guess it's kind of like a seesaw sort of weight scale sort of thing where you kind of have to choose one over the other,
Yeah,
And
but
I
you
guess
want to
that's,
choose safety.
I'd rather choose safety. Yes. I'm
Right.
risk averse. I'm risk.
Risk averse.
Yeah,
I'm
but
risk
go ahead.
averse in a way too. And naturally I'm risk averse. But for capitalists and business leaders, they are the risk takers, right? They're the ones.
That's
That's
true.
why they could get there,
That's the one.
right?
What
And
would
so
you want to?
I wanted to end on an analogy about my view of bailouts. So I think we heard a lot about the forest fires in California, right? A lot of us attribute to global warming temperatures dries up the trees and then they burn easily. But I'll use another part of this analogy. The other analogy is that there's been a buildup of unburned materials. And the reason is because California had natural wildlife, sorry, not wildlife, wildfire cycles, right? Where the fire would burn the all the shrubbery or the dried materials, and that's natural. But we have a lot of people living in California, right? So for safety reasons and to help the forest, we put out those natural wildfires. And so in the short term, you might see this as a good thing. But in the long term, what happens? That dry piles of wood piles up, right? If you don't clean that or get it out of the way, it stays there. Once you have enough, you just need a little fire to kickstart it all, and it becomes a huge crisis. My fear is that that's the direction the American economy is heading. We've been trying to put out these relatively, well, to us, it's big wildfires, but there's a bigger one coming at us because we've been trying to put it out, like trying to stabilize it.
Yeah.
That's my analogy. And of course, it's like it's going to hit you at once. It's not like, I don't know when it's going to happen, tomorrow, next year, next month, or whatever. But that's what I think of bailouts. Yeah. And trying to play God as the invisible hand rather than letting the invisible hand go to work. Anything you want to add to that? Or
I think we've talked about it pretty thoroughly.
okay. So I guess the next topic you were really interested in was Supreme Court. What do you think?
So this is from one of Neil Gorsuch's interviews, and Gorsuch he actually had like a pretty interesting like things to say. So he just like spit out some facts, right? So he's like 40% of the cases that they get are 9-0, and that's like a that's a good amount, right? And he used like an analogy. He's like, you can't even get 9 people to agree on where to go to lunch. But 40% of the time we all agree. And no one ever talks about the 9-0 cases, right?
Right.
So there's that point. And then another point he made was that, the 5-4 cases, or like I think the 5-4 and 6-3 or something like that. But anyway, they're around like 25% of the cases, which is a good amount, right? 25%, that's 1/4. But ever since when FDR appointed 8 judges, right? Eight
Mm-hmm.
justices, right? He appointed 8 justices, which is like a huge majority, right? But
Right.
this percent, right, since that time he appointed 8 justices has been the same. That 25% has been the same. So even when one president, appoints this, one president appoints 8 justices, you would think, oh, they probably, have all same, the same ideologies or whatever, right? No, not necessarily, because that 25% from 1945 or whatever is the same 25% of cases that are 5-4 today. So the court, I would say, is equally contentious as it was. And I think that shows the stability of it overall. And then I guess my final thing to say here is that justices, they cross like these conservative or liberal lines that we put up for them all the time. Yeah, like sure, I think there's definitely conservative and liberal justices, right, on the way they interpret and the way they rule. They interpret like these rulings and whatnot, but they don't always agree, right? They don't always disagree, right? Like I think like in recent cases, right? Like I think a lot of the Trump justices have actually been on the liberal side. I think John Roberts, Roberts, he's not one of them, but like Kavanaugh and like Gorsuch, like they've actually like gone over to the liberal side a couple
For
times.
different reasons,
So
in
I think
different
it's pretty,
cases too.
yeah.
They
So
don't
I
go
think it's pretty
together.
interesting.
Yeah.
So I can't say if it's entirely apolitical, but I think in a polarized and politicized America, this is like pretty dang good. This is pretty dang good. But I don't know. What do you think?
I'm with you on that. I think that, and it shows in the Supreme Court. I think there was a Gallup poll recently showing who's the most popular person in government, and I think John Roberts was number one, and at like in the 60% range. And so that tells you something about the job the Supreme Court is doing, and that they're doing it well, right? But I guess that stems 2 questions for me. Can a political organization be born out of a political process? Because each of these justices, they had to have connection to the president in order for the president to nominate them, right? And then they have to go through the Senate hearing, and then they sit on the court, right? So is it possible, if the selection process is political, to create a apolitical organization? I guess the justices would all say, yeah, it's possible, right? Each of us, yeah, right? But that's just something that dwells on the back of my mind, and just like food for thought for the listeners too. You mentioned that 40% of the cases are 9-0, right? Supreme Court doesn't get many cases a year, right? I think Gorsuch also, I listened to the interview you sent me, right? Gorsuch said like out of like thousands of cases, like 70 come to the Supreme Court. And so that's a testament to like the durability and the flexibility of the law, to like out of all these cases, only 70 need to come to the Supreme Court. Of course, they reject some that are, I guess, controversial, or they don't want to rule at that point. But I don't know. It is a testament, I think, to our nation's rule of law. Well, I mean,
yeah, I think it's, I would say, yeah, right. A political organization can be born out of be born out of political process. But I think like my idea, right, my opinion on the Supreme Court is like, even if it is political or will eventually be political, I think it is the most apolitical branch, right, of government, and the most like apolitical, I guess, like setting that we can see today. Because I think the way, right, it should be that way. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it, right? Like these are scholars, right? These are people who are very smart, and they think about like, the Constitution, and they I don't know, you know what I mean? It's not like we're asking like some random like person on, that you see on the streets to be like, hey, you're the next Supreme Court justice. I think it's a lot more sophisticated. I think that people need to realize like it's a lot more sophisticated than that. These are people who know the law. Like these are people who study it. And I'm not saying like just because you study it makes you an expert, but they would do a heck of a better job than your average American. So I would say that it's more of like a faith in the institution thing, right? Because remember Roberts was saying about like there's no Trump justices, there's no Obama justices,
right.
and I think it speaks to the testament and like I guess the sacredness of the court.
And that was in response to Trump saying that.
And that Trump, right? Trump was calling out the like quote unquote Obama judges, right? I guess like Kagan.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess with Donald Trump, he's a very politicizing figure. You either hate him or you don't, in a way. No, barely anyone is neutral in that sense. But I think Roberts usually doesn't come out to say things against Trump or even say things that support Trump. He tries to remain out of it, and he tries to keep the court, the reputation, the court's reputation as like as an institution relatively neutral. But there's something
Mm.
Gorsuch said that struck me, is that if you expect ignorant people to remain free, it will never happen. I don't think a lot of Americans, I think there was a poll that like 3 out of 5 Americans can't name the 3 branches of government. Forget
Oh
about
yeah,
like
of
checks
course,
and
or something like that. 3 out of 5 or something. I forget.
well, yeah, if that's true, forget about understanding checks and balances, right? If you can't even name the three, if you can't even tell me what's rock paper, if it's rock paper or scissors, forget about playing the game. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think I think that's a very big issue because people look at like, oh, does this justice favor abortion? Does this justice favor affirmative action? That's political. You know what I mean?
yeah.
That's not in the realm of law anymore, right? And I think Gorsuch and the reporter, he had this very contentious exchange because of that. Because the reporter was asking very political questions like, oh, how would you rule on this? And he's like, well, that's getting into politics again. Even on the matter of adding
Mm,
more justices, I thought he would say that's a bad idea, but he didn't even say that. He says that's political. So
mm,
I,
mm.
I I mean,
Yeah,
like, I think we all tend to think very politically about issues because that's what matters most to us. But issues are one level. The rule of law, I think, is another level that we tend to overlook. Yeah.
yeah, and I think people don't realize like these justices are humans too, and they're really good friends. Like for example, right? We have Scalia, right? He's like the the big
Lion of
figurehead of like
conservatism. Yeah.
he has lion conservatism, right? And like
Right.
super original. And then you have like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who we see as like a huge proponent of women's rights, right? She fought really hard, for the things that she believed in, right? And I think people on the left definitely like hold her in high regard, and the people
That's
on the
right.
right hold Scalia in very high regard,
Right.
and they were really good. That's really weird. In my eyes, I don't think you get that a lot. And Scalia, one thing he said is like, you can hate the ideas or you can hate the arguments, but you can't hate the person or something like that.
And if you
And
do, you
he
can
was
find
able
another
to,
job.
yeah. If you can't do that, find another job, right? And he's
Right.
able to sort of extract, right, and separate the person from the ideas. I found something else really funny. Scalia and Kagan, right? So Kagan's one of the quote unquote Obama judges, right? So she's on the liberal side, quote unquote. And Scalia and Kagan, they actually went hunting together. And I
Right.
remember Kagan saying in an interview, she was like, yeah, like I didn't really like hunting and like guns or stuff like that. But then she was like, after I did it with him, like it was kind of fun. And then like seeing like
Yeah.
people being about ideas, being super friendly with one another. Like they're, people don't realize they're colleagues.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. I think that's something like Americans today really need to see and know about.
And I think the thing with Scalia was that he was able to reach across the aisle in a way. He's very uncompromising in what he personally believes, but like taking Kagan out to hunting, like I think it breaks people out of
Yeah.
their bubbles, right? Kagan's this law professor, you think law professors are all pretty liberal, living in Boston, they
Mm.
opposed to, they're completely anti-gun, right? And
But
probably,
also,
huh? And probably like against killing animals, right? But
yeah.
here you are. She actually liked hunting, So I feel that we don't have this like popping of the bubble anymore in our society where like we get different experiences so we can see things from other people's point of view. I don't know if it's just I never attribute it just to social media, but social media definitely has a lot of that to play in this role.
Right.
Yeah. But I guess something you mentioned was that these justices are very intellectual, right? They're not they don't see things as the common
For,
American does. Is that something you get from going to more school, to college? Is that the value of education, to peer at things
right.
underneath the surface rather than just on the surface? What do you get from
Yeah.
college? What's the value for that?
Yeah. So I think it really depends on what you go for. Because a lot of things now you can learn online. I think technology has really changed the way that we interact with the world, right? Like we can literally go on YouTube and like learn how to code or learn how to cook something or learn how to whatever play an instrument, right?
Right. Right.
And a lot of these things are not necessarily complicated to do, right? A lot of these things, obviously there's depth and layers to them, but to get basic knowledge and understanding of things, you can go to college. You don't have to go to college for that, right? So I think what college is really, at the end of the day, right? Like, it's kind of for the clout. It's just essentially for I feel like you're literally just paying like 4 years of tuition for like a piece of paper or whatever it is. Is it even a paper? I don't even know. It's probably like a fancy paper. Like, I don't know. I haven't gotten my diploma, so I don't even know what it looks like.
It might
But
not even, yeah, it might be diploma at this point for you.
sorry.
Might be an diploma, right? Online diploma, not even a physical
Yeah,
paper. But I think they'll give you a
yeah,
physical paper. It's a
yeah.
tradition.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my thing is like, yeah, it's basically a way for you to get a job, right? And a lot of the
Yeah.
things that you learn in college, you're not going to even probably be using in your job. And I think like this is something that you hear from people who go on to very high paying and successful jobs. They're like, yeah, like honestly, like I don't even use a lot of things that I learned. and I think this is it's the idea that everyone wants to get a leg up in society, right? We all want to make more money. We all want to have a better life for ourselves. So everyone wants to go to college. So it's not even necessarily about like what you get out from college. It's what the college like that you went to is. Like, what is the college that you went to? That's more important than the things that you learn. Like, my opinion is this, right? You can't teach financial accounting. Like, I don't think financial accounting is any different in Cornell versus like, some state school.
Rutgers.
I think there's like at a certain point, like you can only teach financial accounting so well. But what Cornell might not have over, or what a community college or a state school might not have over Cornell is just a cloud. And how much of that is like human fabricated? Is just like some like abstract thing that we like put onto the, is it like the dollar? Is it just like we just have faith in the dollar and then there it is? Like, what is it? So yeah, so like whatever that is, that's what the value you are getting out of your college. You're not getting any skills out of it, I think, in my opinion. But yeah.
I see. I'm kind of in agreement with you on that. It's the skills versus like getting the degree. Some people would like to admit that no, college is more than getting the degree, but behind the scenes you're trying to get the degree, right? I think
Exactly.
it goes into how our society is kind of like we do something different than what we say, right? And we say something different than what we do or what we think. We're very disconnected. I think our generation in that sense, right? We're afraid to be genuine about what we say. I think a lot of it has to do with political correctness and all that too, right? To avoid like being canceled and to be part of a group. To humans, it's very important to be part of the group sometimes over the truth, right? So I think this idea of getting a job through college, though, most people want to do that. The problem is if you want higher education, right? If you want to become a professor, a PhD, right? If you don't take the skills you knew in high school or even college from a basic level, you can't keep building on that, right? You might hold a PhD, but you actually have no idea how to write a proof. That's very dangerous, right, for a math professor. And so in that sense, skills are required. But if I guess you go to college for a job, right, then it's not as required. You don't need to know how to write a proof. Like why no,
Right.
like you just need results in a business, right? Get the money in. You don't need to talk about how you got the money or like show your work, right? And so I guess that's the discrepancy. Is because we use college now as a social ladder rather than as an institution for learning, right? But then for me, it's like if you, so that's why for businesses, I think it would be more helpful if they looked at a person's portfolio or required a portfolio rather than education. You know what I mean? Like for you, it's like if you apply to a job, what projects have you done? And you could pull up your Python project or of an internship you had, right? And so this would help the people who didn't go to college give them a chance because they just had to show that they've done some work or had some experience, and a resume is too simple and it's kind of like just a piece of paper. But if you have a portfolio of work, you have like a Google Drive, a folder that you've kept all your work log and then what you've been doing. I think that should be how our society's thinking towards job. But unfortunately, I think we're still stuck in the past kind of.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of what frustrates me then, about education. It's just like I'm 20, well, I guess I'll be 22 in a couple months, right? And it's just kind of like, did I even really need school? you know, like in the sense, like, did I really need to learn about biology in middle school and high school? And you know, like, did I really need to learn about, I don't know, like literally like any other subject, right? Like that
Polar
I feel like
coordinates, trigonometry,
yeah, like yeah, like
imaginary numbers.
yeah, like
Alan would be hurt
imaginary
right now.
yeah, yeah. But I guess like my thing with that is just like, okay, like what people will probably respond to me is, you know, like, well, how do you know what you're gonna do when you're older, right? You know, like you need to learn about all these different things. You know, you need to like learn about biology and chemistry and physics, and you need to like learn how to play the piano and do like these like random extracurriculars when you're in high school and middle school, right? Because you don't know what you're going to be in the future. But then I'm like, okay, like we put in all that effort and we're literally using none of it. So we might as well just literally not have done it in the first place. That's kind of my argument. You know, like the fact
Right.
is that we did not do it. And I think for the majority of people, you could probably just like throw them into college from like age like whatever 14 15, and they can come out of, or honestly just skip middle school. You know, like, why do we even need middle school? Like I feel like I took algebra 1 like 3 times in middle school, like every single year. Like, you know, it's kind of like, in my sense, that's like kind of a bureaucracy thing that I would love to get rid of. Like making it so that education doesn't have to be this long and dragged out process. You might talk about emotional intelligence or people at 18, you know, like, you know, you need to wait until you're 18 because you're not emotionally intelligent or whatever. And I think that's all BS, like in my opinion. Like literally stop wasting people's time. Because like I'm 20, I've already lived 1/4 of my life, and I've been in school all my life. And I've learned, and I'm pretty, or I guess like 0 to 5.
I think
We don't count
because
that.
you and I are relatively responsible people that we think that. But for those who are not as responsible, or like they need a school, they need like structure in order to learn, right? If they don't learn how to take notes in middle school, there's no way they're gonna take notes when they're in college. Do you know what I mean? And it's not to say like taking notes would get you an A. I took a lot of notes in college and I failed a class, right? So it's not a guarantee, but when people see, I know at work, if you're listening to someone, they see that you're writing down what they're saying, that gives them an impression that you're caring about what they're saying, versus if you're just sitting there going, right? Then they might see you as like, I don't know, it's this like unspoken skills, or like unspoken, how do you say, unspoken etiquette. It's not even etiquette, it's like,
like social norms sort of thing.
it's, yeah, but it's a beyond social norms, is more like useless things, you know, or like or a social norm is like, oh, you have to say hi when you see a person, you know what I mean? It's like nice. But
Right.
I
Okay.
don't want to call it social norm, because like taking notes is not like being nice. It's more like it could help you in a way too. You don't know when you need it, right? Or like, I don't know, what's another thing in middle school? Like gym. You might think of gym as the worst class ever, right? People just walk around these days or play volleyball. That's all gym class is in public schools. But if for walking around, at least the goal is to get you to like move, right? Rather than like in COVID times, well, you just sit at home. Hopefully, like at least you go take a walk, right? And so there's and it's hard to see it. I think the other thing I'm frustrated with the public school system, at least, is that it tries to create a well-rounded individual, so it requires you to take a lot of these classes, right? But I know some people who are super geniuses in like math, that they just can't write an essay, right? They just can't. And I see
Yeah.
this at Rutgers. Rutgers requires you to take expository writing, which is like a class that everyone has to take. I had a someone younger than me who passed the class that I failed in, but he failed expository writing. He was a math genius. But the thing with geniuses is that they're only geniuses in a very narrow subject, right? They're not geniuses
Yeah.
in everything. And so
Unless you're
by trying to, unless you're, Alan too, with essays too, you can talk to him about essays. He doesn't like writing essays either. So the thing is
yeah.
that it's like when trying to create a well-rounded individual, you're actually hurting the geniuses in a way. And so perhaps I think the situation would be to allow more customizable or flexible curriculum, but I wouldn't get rid of the education system. Yeah, I still think
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
there's,
So I think I would like to add your feature onto my ideal education
there we
system.
go.
Cut it by 3 to 4 years, so people graduate at like 14, 15 instead, and so they don't have to waste their time like doing like balancing chemical equations, and then customize it so then they can do what they're good at.
But see, for those people who go on to organic chemistry, they definitely need to know how to balance chemical equations.
Right. But then here's the thing: they teach they just like teach it in college again. You know what I mean? Like I guess like okay, I guess it's like they're not going
Wait,
to teach like algebra 2
so in
college.
Clayton's country, you would graduate at 14 without learning balancing equations and learn that in college?
Well, because like honestly, like I feel like a lot of like I don't know, at least like the people that in my that I know that are in STEM and stuff, like they're taking calc again. You know what I mean? They're taking calc again, and even though they took calc in high school, and it's just kind of like why the repeat? You know? I guess like sure you can say reinforce whatever, but I just see it as a waste of time.
No, there's two reasons for that. There's two reasons. One is the AP credit, they don't take it. Usually it's Ivy League schools, they don't take calculus AP Calc credits. And the second reason is related to the first reason. It's that so then it's more detailed.
Like, right. So then just cut it. Then don't even bother doing the half-ass calc in the first place. You know, but it's not, just go into it.
But you can't do the full-ass calc if you don't do the half-ass calc.
Yeah, but then for me, it's just like, why are we wasting? You know what I mean? Like, you're teaching the power rule. You're teaching the power rule. You spend a week on the power rule in high school, and then you're gonna spend like another lecture on it in college. Like for me, it's just like, why not just do it like one time done? That's my thing. Because I don't know. Maybe it's because like I'm a business student, so I don't really have a tough curriculum. Honestly, it's like super easy compared to any of these STEM people or even like humanities major. It's a lot easier, right? Because we don't have to interpret what like things are saying. So like I have it pretty easy, but like honestly, I feel like at least if you're in the business track, like there's really no point in like I don't know. Like literally, I've not been able anything from high school. Oh, besides stats in like history and econ. I think that's it. But did I really need to spend 4 years in high school to learn all those things? I don't think so. But yeah.
Because it's hard. I guess this goes into tailoring something for the individual versus like more utilitarian thinking, right? You need to help a great amount of people, right? Because like I guess maybe in like if we do a thought bubble for a sec, if we had just one school in the U.S., right? The school regulated all curriculums, right? This school like that would create a more efficient system. You know what I mean? But the thing is like when you go to a different school, like especially college, people don't know where you're coming from or what's your background, right? And so they need to like restart or like bridge over some of the parts that you already learned. And I guess that as students we feel it's a waste of time. But perhaps like on a greater scale, like from the administrator point of view, it's more worth it than let's say never took calculus and went into college doing calc. I don't know. This is something I guess I'll ask some of my friends who are doing a master's in education. But yeah, anything more to say on value of education in colleges?
No, well, I guess like one last thing is just like it doesn't even matter what I say because the system's already so ingrained and it's already the way it is that it's probably going to stay this way for the rest of like the time that we're here on this earth. So it doesn't even matter. But yeah, that's all I got to say.
I think it could change though. America's relatively fluid right now, so you never know what someone might listening might try to implement your ideas for better or for worse.
Thank you for stressing the worst part. It makes it so bad.
Because I don't know. Sometimes good intentions have bad results, right? So
possible.
Yeah. Speaking of that, good intentions have bad results. I guess we're entering into realm of philosophy, right? Some things that and I guess we have an interesting take because we're both kind of like we think a lot and people tell us we think too much and we should think a bit less. And then but we still think a lot too, right? And then we're also, I guess, Christians. And then I guess there's this associated like thing with Christians being like Trump supporters or think things very simply or don't think at all, right? They're people of faith. They don't need to do thinking. But I guess so we're kind of caught in the middle. And I guess our philosophy friends would make fun of us and go like, well, why the hell are you still believing in God? You know, that's so like pre-Nietzsche, right? God is dead or something like that. So I guess we could try to reconcile the two a bit right now. Are they compatible at all? Why don't we start there?
Yeah, so I'm taking a medieval philosophy class right now, and we're going over some of the philosophers like of that time. And Augustine is a huge one. So he's
I just want to cut in for a sec. Is this the same philosophy class that you had to write the ethics one on? The universal ethics or something? Yes? Okay. But Augustine?
I wrote another essay last week too,
No
and
one
that was
liked the
rough.
YouTube video, so you didn't get extra credit.
No.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
go on, August.
yeah,
What about him?
yeah. So Augustine, he kind of saw that, right? He kind of saw that, like, hey, people think Christians are just like, or Christianity and philosophy, like, it's just not compatible because Christians, a lot of them back then and still do today. I think we both agree on that. We kind of just take everything at face value, like whatever the preacher or the elder brother or whatever, like whatever the pastor tells us, like we're kind of just like yeah, or some people are just like whatever, they're apathetic to it, but no one ever critically thinks about it, right? I think there's a lot less of those people. And what Augustine did was he kind of said, well, no, because there's two different types of learning, right? There's like one where you just kind of accept everything, right? And that everything that comes your
Yeah,
way,
you're a scanner.
that comes, sorry?
A scanner type of learning. You just scan what's on the paper.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. You scan it and you just copy it.
Regurgitate. Yeah.
But then there's another type of learning, right? Another type of receiving and thinking is where you receive it and you think about it and then you can come out with your own opinion. And Augustine bridged philosophy and Christianity through this way. He basically, philosophy in Greek, right? Like means like love of wisdom, right? And he was like, okay, well, like in the Bible, wisdom is an attribute that is often like attributed to God, right? And like for example, in Proverbs we have Lady Wisdom. We even have like the wisdom books and the wisdom literature, right, in the Christian tradition at least. So wisdom, love of wisdom, is really love of God. So he used this kind of like tacky word game to say that, well, to study philosophy, we're actually looking in the truth and nature of things, and that it doesn't have to be separate, right? We shouldn't fear the truth, and in some ways we should find ways to have the truth fit our Christian truth. And I think that's a very different way of thinking than sort of the submissive attitudes that, like conservative, like evangelical, like Trump-loving Christians that people might think that are prevalent today, which they definitely are. But yeah, I think it's just a way to open the mind more, right? And we have
Yes.
Augustine, and then we have guys like Anselm after that. And I think it's really important, right? Because as a Christian, you want to understand that the tradition you came from, right? You want to understand the Hebrew, you want to understand the Greek, you want to understand even the philosophy and the thinkings behind why the Bible was written the way it was. So I think it's something that we've lost, or maybe we never really had it first.
I think for our generation we lost, but like for our parents' generation, they didn't just accept it because they didn't grow up in church, right? They were immigrants from China, and so they didn't touch on Christianity until much later in their lives. And they had to not be stupid, I think, to come over to the US, right? Usually a lot of them have high degrees because they came through and they came here for education. So definitely I think that for them, accepting Christianity, it wasn't just like a listen and I accept it. For our generation though, because we grew up in church, that's different. That's where you start having this issue of you just accept things because you hear it and you don't think through it and it doesn't apply to you. Objectively, you know it, but subjectively, it doesn't relate to you at all. That's a huge issue, I think, that's going on right now. And I don't quite know how to solve it other than think more about it or really, really wrestle with it. Kind of like how Jacob wrestles with God. If you don't wrestle with God, you're not going to have it your way, or you won't understand the truth. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but then God's gonna touch your hip anyway and paralyze you for the rest of your life. So that's the other side of the story. I guess okay, compatibility. But what are you gonna say?
So I wouldn't really necessarily think, I guess, like compatibility, but also like on top of that, right? It's more like philosophy fills in the gaps. So the Bible is a big book, right? Or actually, it's a big collection of books, right? And there's a lot of things the Bible talks about. But then there's a lot of things that the Bible doesn't talk about or doesn't even care about, right? For example, I don't think the Bible particularly cares in Genesis 1 how the world was created. I don't think the world was created like that way. And I don't think the authors really believe that too, It's just kind of like their way of talking and their way of doing things. I don't think they're necessarily concerned about the science and the whole like physics behind it, you know what I mean? And those are questions that we can't answer. But philosophy helps us answer some of those questions, right? Like, for example, why is there good in evil? Why is there evil in a good world, supposedly created by a good God, right? Why does God allow evil? Like, that's theodicy. That's like that's a huge question, right? people
Mm.
have. Like, why do we have free will or not, right? Things like that. So I think the philosophy really helps bridge those gaps. So I know you had a question that you wanted to talk about, one of
I
those
see.
philosophical questions, so we can
Why
get a little bit more concrete.
why do bad things happen under God? I think that
Yeah,
that's
that
that's
was
my
it.
question.
That's
And then you mentioned it too. That's one of the big questions then, right? With COVID, people died because of
mm,
COVID, right? People in church
right.
said, well, we have to pray that God can have His way and move forward during this time. Well, to the people who are dead, there's no way God can move forward for them to see God move forward, right?
Yeah.
So I. Why do bad things happen under God? I still don't know at this point. I just have to honestly say I don't know, right? Church might say there's a higher purpose that we don't see, but that only goes so far. And the example I can think of is Job, right? God caused a lot of bad things to happen to Job. And then Job like still didn't see the full picture by the end of the book, but at least I don't know, he remained faithful to God. But the problem is, what about his sons and daughters that died originally? God just gave him new sons and daughters. Like, that's not how you replace human life. You can't replace human life that
Mm,
way, right? How about Job's sons and daughters? Did they get a chance to grow? No, they didn't get a chance to grow. They helped Job grow, or that's debatable at that point. But they themselves didn't get a chance. And so when you have the question, why do bad things happen under God? I still don't have a very satisfactory answer. But how about for
yeah.
you though?
So I'm gonna give a couple answers, a couple different takes, because we're gonna do some philosophy right now. We're gonna go back and forth, like, and break down different arguments,
Oh
because this is
boy.
fun,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So I feel like the
Yes,
first
yes, yes.
you would get from a lot of I guess like church people, right? Who will be like, ever since the fall, right? Sin found its way into the world. So the nature of sin is to be opposed to God, right? Sin literally means miss the mark,
Missed the
right?
mark,
Like in
yes.
Hebrew, right? And
Yeah.
in Greek it's harmatia, right? So to miss the mark, and that's what literally it's embedded in just in everything we do, whether intentional or not intentional. I don't think that's a good argument, right? And I don't buy that. So here's another argument. I think another argument as to why bad things can happen under a good God is Anselm kind of gives this argument, and he was a Christian philosopher. He kind of took after Augustine. So if you think about Augustine, right, like kind of started it, and Augustine
Right.
kind of took. Augustine started those ideas. Anselm took it and ran with it. So
Right.
he has a text or a dialogue, a philosophical dialogue between a student and a teacher, right? And I guess he's the teacher, and he has probably the student play one of his students in his dialogue. But anyway, it's called On the Fall of the Devil, and it asks the question, right? Why did the devil fall, right? Like why did how did a good angel, like, is it a good angel fall? Like was it not a good angel? Did God give this angel like the capabilities to do good? And he kind of comes to this long-winded, like all things in philosophy, it's like a long-winded proof. And he comes down to the idea that there's two wills within each of us, right? There's two wills in each of us. There's the will of justice, and he calls it which is like the will of rectitude, right? To do good things. And then there's the will of happiness, right? And that's more like self-advantageous. Both of those things are inherently good, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not like anything bad, but the reason why we need both of those wills is that they conflict with each other, and you kind of have to choose. So God gives both of those wills to us, and then we're able to kind of like go off of that, right? So for in the case of the devil, his is the devil him? I don't even know. His will for happiness and his will for self-advantageousness, it triumphed over the will of justice to do good, and he decided to give in to himself, right? And that's kind of like his argument there. And the reason why, in Anselm's eyes, that why do we need these two wills? Like, what's the point? Why can't we just have one? Well, the reason why is because if we had one will, would you have free will? Not really, right? Because there's literally only one choice, right? So if you only have one will, and there's only one way things are going to play out, then how can I justly punish you or reward you for doing the things that you do?
But
Right? I can't justly punish you if you were always meant to do something, right?
well,
It's like
you're talking about two wills, right? Will to do good things, this
yeah,
just will of justice versus will of happiness, right?
right.
If
Which is
there's
good
just
things for my
right, if you just chose will of justice, right?
yeah.
Just a will of justice. You could try to do injustice, right? There's nothing
Mm.
forcing you to just do justice. So it's not, it is, you still do have a choice in that sense, no? Or
Yeah,
am I
so
getting you
so
right?
I guess like so I guess with Anselm, he has this in the context of the fall, like the fall of human being. So he says
Oh, okay.
that the way he explains it is this, right? We have the power, but we don't have the expression of that power is not necessarily there. So for example, right? So if you can see, right? We both can see, right? But can we see the mountain that's like 30 miles like north of us or whatever, right? No, because the certain conditions are not met, right? Certain conditions need to be met for us to see that mountain. So likewise, with the power to do good and the power to do bad things, right? The sin took that, it didn't take that power away, but it took the conditions of that power away. So we still have the power to do good things in a fallen state, or the power to do, he calls it rectitude, right? Or justice. Well, justice, he differentiates actually between justice and rectitude. But
Gotcha.
he calls rectitude truth, right? So the ability to do truth, we all have it, but the conditions are not there after we fall. So the point of God's grace then is to put us in the condition to do good things, so we can actually express the power.
That sounds like Romans 7
I,
and 8 then. Law of good, law of evil,
mm,
law of life, this good and evil
mm,
philosophy. It's eerily similar. I think it could be mapped onto it. But what were you gonna say?
yeah. So that's another argument, and I think there's a lot more arguments. But my argument is this: I think we really need to really redefine what good and evil is. This is what I believe in. We
Okay.
think we come in with we mentioned this last time, right? Religious baggage. We come in with ideas of what God is: omnipotent, whatever, right? Omniscient, omnibenevolent, right?
Mm.
But none of these ideas actually are ever said in the Bible. And in fact, God is a very complex character in the Bible. He literally like kills babies and kills innocent people, right?
Yes.
From a very like unbiased perspective, yes, obviously it's a lot more complicated than that, right? Because there's huge storylines in the Bible, right? God just doesn't do things randomly. God has a temper, right? And eventually that temper boils over, and there are recipients of his wrath and his justice, right?
Yes.
So I think we need to really we need to relabel and reevaluate what being good is. What God is, like when we say God is good, what does that mean? Because if you think that God is good, meaning that he has unlimited mercy and like whatever, I think if you read the Bible and you come to that conclusion, I think you need to read the Bible again, because the
Yes.
Bible does not come to that conclusion. There is a limit that God has to these things. And so when it comes to things like wildfires and things that we can't control, I'm kind of like, well, like that's I don't know if God caused that, but if God allowed that, that doesn't go against his character. Because in my eyes, I don't see God as an omnibenevolent, omnimerciful, whatever God. I don't see him as this, like, no matter what you do, Clayton, I'll always love you. I don't see him that way. I think he has a temper. He has a limit. And I think that's where a lot of Christians probably will disagree with me on that. But then there's no way I can still believe in a God that's omnibenevolent, and then look at COVID, like you said, right? That's already killed 1 million people in the U.S. and will continue to kill more. I can't reconcile those two things. So then I have to give up the fact that God is omnibenevolent. And to be honest, when I read the Bible, I realize that he's probably not as omnibenevolent as I thought. And all this religious baggage that we carry into, the Bible from the Western world, I think we really need to leave it at the door and kind of come in with a new state. And I think it ultimately leads us to the fact that God is a complicated character. And there's a lot of tension between God's mercy and God's wrath, and God's whatever with God's whatever within the Bible. There's a huge tension. So it's not like God is one or the other. I think God is on a spectrum, as I think that's more accurate to say.
But then like with COVID, I guess if people had just gotten vaccine or masked up, right? Would there be a need to put God into this equation? Like, I guess based on what you're telling me, like God's still there, right? And then COVID, I guess you're trying to reconcile God with COVID. But for me, it's almost like, is God even there in the equation at all? It's like for COVID.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
You know what I mean?
So I guess with me, I haven't ever thought about God in COVID, but I was just using your example. I guess I don't know.
Okay.
Was God? Maybe it came out a lot.
But it's like if I'm hungry today, right? Is it God's fault really? Or if I just didn't get food to eat, right? Or like if I'm trying to use in electronics we use
right. Okay. So actually that's a really good point. So Anselm actually kind of talks about this, and I forgot to mention it, but he talks about the idea that if Austin, I have a cloak, he calls it a cloak or a jacket, right?
Sure.
If it's you, right? You let's say you're naked.
Right.
If I give you the cloak, and then I'm still the owner, right? I'm still
Right.
the owner, so I can take it back whenever I want, right?
Right.
Right? Am I right? Yeah, it is, right?
Right.
So if I can take it back, do I cause your nakedness? No, you were naked to begin with. That's what Anselm would argue. I don't know if I totally, I guess, agree with that, because then it kind of like eliminates God. Like, does God have, and then you can ask the question, right? If everything is a gift of God, right? If everything that we have that is good, a gift, and when it's not there, that's just kind of like the natural state that things are, then does God have a responsibility? I don't know. I haven't thought about that question a lot.
But that's Job's
what kind of,
conclusion. That's Job's conclusion. God takes away, God gives, and God takes away, right?
yeah.
So you've actually reached Job's conclusion through philosophy. When like
Yeah,
everyone's like,
yeah.
well, why don't you curse God at this point? He says, well, God gives, God takes away. He naturally
Yeah.
came to that conclusion. Then that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Because Anselm would say too, to add on to that, right? It's because like it's the natural state of things is for us to not be clothed or to be hungry. So the fact
natural
when we're
state of
not,
things, I don't exist.
yeah,
Is that the natural?
right? So
That
for
might be
everything
it.
that you have, he would argue that's God. That's God playing, like God, allowing, creating an ecosystem for like plants to grow or whatever. Like that's a gift to you. He would say that, and he has the right to take it away and to give it back, take it away or give it back. And the ancient Hebrew authors had a similar idea with the idea of breath or spirit, right? Remember how God created Adam and Eve. What did he do? He breathed into them. And then when it came time for Noah's flood, right, the flood, God said, I'm going to take that breath out of them. The Hebrew word is ruach, right?
Right.
Spirit. So what God did when he killed everyone during the flood, he took his spirit back. He took his life-sustaining force back. That's breath or spirit. We translate it as spirit, yeah. But it's also breath, the word for breath or wind. So anyway, yeah, I think that's the idea that Anselm kind of expands on, and Job definitely touches on too.
That kind of like,
I don't know if I totally agree with it. I don't know.
I'm trying to find a way not to agree with it. It's so like, wow, that's like I'm ensnared in this like situation where like the cloak, really, like, so I would have no cloak to begin with. You know what I mean? So it's like hard to get out of that. How do you get out of that? Or do you just not get out of that? Is that just how the natural state of things is?
We have a change of mindset in order to reconcile things. We have to have a change of mindset. We have to like change the ideas of what's good, what's bad, what we have, what we don't have. Reframing things as a gift rather than taking it for granted and thinking that we deserve it.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe we would have to change in order to make things compatible. Otherwise, it becomes really hard to make things compatible, right?
It's very chaotic in the mind. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I guess that's where Nietzsche would be like, you guys are idiots. Why are you trying to make things compatible? It's just a coping mechanism.
Sure, but then you go crazy like him. So I mean, there's that.
Go crazy like.
Yeah, that's. I don't know. I don't know. This is kind of like, yeah.
But,
I don't know if this is the way to think about life, but.
But here's the thing. I want to end on this. I'm a friend with a philosopher, I guess a philosophy professor at Cornell, and he's a Christian. Surprisingly, there are Christian philosophers out there, and he told me this. He was like, a lot of times when people come to philosophy, especially like freshmen who are going to be philosophy majors, they try to like go to class and like try to get a home run answer. Like, oh yeah, this is just the way things are. I'm gonna beat all of the other philosophers, and all their arguments are stupid. And he says you have to realize that philosophy is not like a one size fits all sort of like home run thing. It's like a boxing match. There's gonna be hits one way and then hits another way. And it's kind of like you kind of have to duke it out in battle. And at the end of the day, you kind of have to decide what is the better argument. We might not have the best argument. We might not have the perfect argument, but we have the best arguments or better arguments. So it's like inference to the best possible explanation. So unfortunately, no matter how much you philosophize things, you might never get a good answer or an answer that you're satisfied with, or maybe you're satisfied with, but maybe others would think it's stupid. And I think honestly, I think that's beautiful. Otherwise, life would be really boring.
That's a lot of food for thought. Well, I guess it's about time. So we'll end here for today. A lot of deep topics, far-ranging topics. So hopefully our listeners will think about them a bit, maybe comment below. And Clayton, thanks for having you on, and hope to get you on soon too.
All right, thanks for having me.
Okay, bye everyone.